Welcome to the EdUCATE Essentials podcast. EdUCATE Essentials is an educational podcast that provides essential information, resources, and tips about education, leadership, and topics about diverse learners. Diverse learners include students with disabilities who receive services under Section 504 or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, response to intervention and the multi-tiered system of support, English speakers of other languages, and related diverse learner categories. EdUCATE Essentials' mission is to bring positive awareness and promote equity and inclusion in education by sharing information and topics about non-traditional learners. EdUCATE Essentials' goal is to restore faith in education one student at a time by empowering listeners with knowledge, because we all know that knowledge is power, so let's be powerful. I am your host, Dr. Nakia, sending you good vibes and thanking you for joining me for another episode of the EdUCATE Essentials podcast. Let's go ahead and start this episode with our EdUCATE inspirational story. And today's story is an exceptional homecoming queen. Emma Wright, who has Down syndrome, was named homecoming queen at East Forsyth High School in Forsyth County, North Carolina, during the school's halftime football game. Wright was crowned queen with almost unanimous votes from her peers. The announcement was a surprise to Emma and her family, who were overwhelmed with gratitude and excitement. Emma's father walked her onto the field, and he was with her when she won and was crowned homecoming queen. In an emotional moment, Emma shares that she has lots of good people supporting her every day. The East Forsyth principal said that the gesture embodies everything he wants his school to be about, and that the district pushes each school to make inclusiveness a priority. Kudos to you, Emma, and the whole community in Forsyth County, North Carolina. This is a wonderful story. And Emma Wright, you are so well deserving of being crowned the queen that you are. If you are interested in this story, it will be on the EdUCATE Essentials YouTube page. Now let's shift to our dates to remember for the month of April. April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. April is also Counseling Awareness Month, Financial Literacy Month, Mathematics Statistics Awareness Month, Multilingual Advocacy Month, National Internship Awareness Month, National Occupational Therapist Month, National Volunteer Appreciation Month, Poetry Month, School Library Month. April is also Parkinson's Awareness Month in the United States. April is also World Autism Acceptance Month. Now let's shift into our individual dates for the month of April. April 1st is National Assistant Principals Week, and that begins April 1st through the 5th. April 3rd is Paraprofessional Appreciation Day. April 4th is National School Librarian Day. April 7th is National Library Week, which begins April 7th through the 13th. April 8th is National Robotics Week, which begins April 8th through the 12th. April 22nd is Earth Day. April 22nd is also National Public School Volunteer Week for the week of April 22nd through the 26th. April 23rd is National School Bus Drivers Day. April 24th is Administrative Professionals Day, and April 26th is Arbor Day. These dates will be on the newsletter, the EdUCATE Consulting newsletter. Make sure that you subscribe to the EdUCATE Consulting newsletter at www.educateconsulting.com, and these dates will be in the monthly newsletter and on the EdUCATE Consulting website for you to access. And that is it for the month of April. Now let's shift to our essential news. The U.S. Department of Education has released non-regulatory guidance to help expand preschool programs supported by Title I. The guidance clarifies that children with disabilities are eligible to participate on the same basis as those without disabilities. However, when funding is limited, the local education agency or school can determine priority needs. The guidance also emphasizes that parents, including those parents of students with disabilities, must be considered when implementing family engagement requirements. Title I services can be provided to eligible children in need who do not qualify for Head Start. Local education agencies may access Medicaid-covered health and medical services for Medicaid-enrolled children with disabilities. To give you a little background about Title I services, Title I services provide supplemental funding to support educators in improving the academic achievement of students who are economically and educationally disadvantaged. The next story comes from the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, and the Office of Civil Rights has released 4 new resources for students, parents, and schools regarding the civil rights of students with disabilities. Additionally, OCR has published a data snapshot for education access for students with disabilities drawn from the 2020 to 2021 Civil Rights Data Collection. These resources clarify the legal rights of students with disabilities under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which prohibits discrimination against students with disabilities by institutions that accept federal financial assistance. The new resources address common medical conditions that can be disabilities under Section 504. OCR's CRDC data snapshot reports that 8.4 million students with disabilities accounted for 17% of the overall public school enrollment during the years of 2020 and 2021. The data also reveals troubling differences in the experiences of students with disabilities. For example, students with disabilities were overrepresented in disciplinary action and underrepresented in advanced placement courses, gifted and talented programs, dual enrollment, or dual credit programs. These resources are essential tools for students with disabilities, their families, and schools to understand when and how federal disability rights laws can protect them. And our third story for Essential News, Senator Bill Cassidy has released a 9-page report called Preventing a Lost Generation, Facing a Critical Moment for Students' Literacy. The report highlights the decline of reading scores nationwide and its implications. Cassidy identifies the problem as a lack of teacher preparation for the science of reading and the approach to literacy. According to Cassidy, the science of literacy states that students learn how to read best when they have explicit, systematic, and cumulative instruction in the 5 pillars of literacy: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. To gather public input regarding the literacy crisis, the Center has posed 17 questions for federal feedback focused on policies and areas beyond policy, supporting parents and teacher preparation. He is seeking replies by April 5th, 2024, and I will have that resource, the literacy report, the OCR information, and all of the essential news stories on the EdUfaith Essentials YouTube page. So make sure that you subscribe to the EdUfaith Essentials YouTube page. Now let's shift to our essential knowledge for today. Our essential knowledge for today's episode, we have a special guest and dear friend of mine, Dr. Barbara Ely, and she goes by Bobby. Let me give you a little background about Bobby. Dr. Bobby Ely has been in education for over 30 years, and she has been in the classroom teaching students with various exceptionalities throughout her progressive career. Her main focus has been supporting and advocating for students with hearing loss, vision impairments, and motor difficulties. Dr. Ely has provided many experiences to children with exceptionalities through community camps, field trips, scholarship contests, theater for the deaf, and many more. She believes in educating children, other teachers, and families through early intervention to help families learn about each child's exceptionalism. Dr. Bobby Ely is now a supervisor in special education in a Metro Atlanta school district, and she continues to make a difference for her team members and her students who she supports and serves. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my dear friend and expert, Dr. Barbara Ely, to talk to us about vision impaired programs, hearing impaired programs, and orthopedic impaired programs. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Ely. You want us to call you Dr. Bobby or Dr. Ely? Which one works for you?
Whichever you're comfortable with. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. We're going to go with Dr. Bobby. All right. Well, you are a supervisor and you are in charge of a couple of programs that support students with special needs. And with that said, I wanted to bring you on to talk about some specific programs in which you have expertise. The first program we want to talk about is the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program. So I have a couple of questions for you. Hopefully this will help educators, parents, and community members become more aware about the impairments and learn how to sustain resources and what they need to for their child or for the individual in their life to be successful. First question, can you provide an overview of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing programs And what services are usually offered in those programs?
Deaf and hard of hearing services differ all over the place, even within the county, because they have to meet the specialized needs of the students. Every student with a hearing loss, even if it's the same on paper, is not the same for their functioning. So we have to provide services based on mode of communication, whether that is speech, oral. They can do sign language. They could do sign language with support. So there's many different services available. We also have what's called CPRNT. And those accommodations and services are provided either by an interpreter if it's out in the gen ed classroom or out in a classroom where there is no teacher that signs. And then the other is inside a small group classroom. And then those services could look even different from, the services that are going on in the next classroom.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Well, technology is everywhere, and I'm sure technology has played a role in enhancing accessibility. Could you talk to us about how technology has played a role in enhancing accessibility for individuals who are in deaf or hard of hearing programs? Or deaf
Yes.
and hard of hearing programs. Let me correct myself. Deaf and hard of hearing programs.
Yes, the role of technology has really come a long way since I started teaching in 1992. Back in 1992, we had the TTY where, they could make phone calls by typing, and it was kind of a series of Morse code is what it sounded like. And then the other person was reading from a screen from what they typed. So it was kind of back and forth. And then the technology started coming online with the internet, and there were services where you could call a person with hearing loss, and they would have either an interpreter, if they used an interpreter on the other side, or an oral interpreter where they can see their lips, or you could always choose to do kind of like an IM message and just go back and forth with the person. But now technology is everywhere, and people with hearing loss can use it on their cell phones, on their landlines. Yes, they still have landlines. They also have video services for their office. So if you call a certain number, that person will, with the hearing loss, will pick up the phone, and then there'll be an interpreter in the middle. So if you don't sign and you're calling the person with hearing loss, then the interpreter would facilitate that conversation. The other thing that's come through, especially since COVID, is the improvement of captioning. The captioning services, it's the same that you see on TVs when you have the open captions and you're watching them, and sometimes, there's mistakes and they don't make sense, or it's behind where the actual voice is. And that has improved a lot. They can even request that service in the movie theater so that they can see a movie and have sound if they need it, and captioning. And now Disney and Marvel are coming up with ASL right on the movies. So this new movie, Barbie, that came out, you can request to see the movie, and there's a sign language interpreter on the screen during the whole thing. She does the music, she does the acting. So it's pretty incredible where technology has gone.
Wow, I did not know that. So that's interesting. You can go to the movies and you can watch the movie just like everyone else. I love the inclusivity and the way that technology has evolved. I wanted to ask you just a side question. Since we're on Zoom and on Teams, how does that work with the deaf and hard of hearing population as far as is it transcribing? Is that what helps with the Zoom and the Teams with the virtual meetings and things like that, transcribing? Or how do you access services through Zoom and Teams?
Yeah, there's several different ways for those as well. Zoom and Teams kind of, do updates to outdo each other or meet, each other's services, but the both of them allow you to do what's called pin an interpreter. So that there is, if you're using sign language, there's an interpreter screen and it stays up while everybody else is talking. so they can receive services that way. Transcription can appear on the side. You could also have the closed captionings either at the bottom or the top. And it even identifies the person who's saying things. So if you have 5 people up on your screen and I'm the one talking, not only is my screen lit up like it normally would be, but they can also pin my screen so that they can watch the interpreter and me at the same time, or they can enable their captions. And there's several captioning companies out there now that are much better than they used to be. So speech to text is huge.
Okay, great information. In what ways do local programs collaborate with educational institutions or employers to include or to ensure inclusivity and equal opportunities with the deaf and hard of hearing individuals or with deaf and hard of hearing individuals?
Well, collaboration in the between the educational institutions and employers looks different everywhere. So we
Hmm.
have you may have a school for the deaf in your state, and they may have a pathways program where you're learning, say, everything on the internet, and you can get a certificate in that, or you can go to a local college and be dual enrolled. They have specialized instruction as far as if you're at the school for the deaf, you can have
Hmm.
instruction and like study skills for whatever you're
Hmm.
taking at the college. The other thing that they're doing now is providing a lot more services more easily accessible to get for people with hearing loss. So, what I mean
Hmm.
by that is when you have a college and you go to the college and you say, hey, I need these, they're going to do their normal testing, they need the normal audiogram and that type of thing, but they now have more services available. So, if you say you want the C print service or the captioning service or the um, sign language or you need a note taker, all of those are much more easily accessible now.
Okay, awesome. And so C notes mean you're actually going to visually see the notes so you can access them, right?
Correct. So the C print does,
C
it's
print.
a person that's typing, almost like the court stenographer. They're
Hmm.
typing, and all the words are coming up on on a screen that's just on the student's desk.
Okay, awesome. I'm learning, so I'm asking questions as I learn myself. Okay, what are some common challenges that individuals face in the community? Two part. And then how do programs usually address or support them? Could you just give me like a one example, for instance, a common challenge, and then how schools usually address them?
Okay, a common challenges in the community are things like being able to get your driver's license. They have to have a special driving session so that because it's better to have an interpreter with you if that's what you use, but obviously it's not safe to drive and try to read lips at the same time or try to read sign language at the same time. So that becomes a challenge. Going to a restaurant is always a challenge because there's always noise in the background and the menu's always, up on a board.
Hmm.
And mostly that's now taken care of with your iPhone or your Android phone, what you're doing with that. And you just type your order on that. Or you can also put your phone on like a word dictate or a speech to text program where you can have the person, say whatever they need in the into the phone, and then you bring your phone back and you can read it. So it's challenging to do just about anything. You
Hmm.
can't drive up to the drive-through. You can't go into a place and just ask a question like at the supermarket. It's all either based on technology. If you have your speech and it's intelligible speech, always do that. The phone has kind of replaced the going back and forth with notes for
Okay.
any challenging situations.
All right. And then school programs, how do school programs usually address trying to meet the needs or the challenges of a student who's deaf and hard of hearing?
So those change a lot because of reading level and because of whatever their mode of communication they pick, whether it's being oral or signing, what kind of amplification they have, whether they have hearing aids or cochlear implants.
Mhm.
And so the school is continually trying to keep up with what the student needs are at the moment, and then what are they going to need for, when you discuss their annual IEP, what are they going to need for the next step? So if you have a third grader who's only using an interpreter, and then the third grader's reading level is on level, then they can use the CPRIT services. You could also, they do a lot of things with the PowerPoints now. In the PowerPoints now, there's actually speech to text that comes up while you're doing your PowerPoint. That can help. The teachers wear what's called hearing assistive technology, and that is where the teacher wears a microphone and the voice comes directly to the student's ears. So that's all that they're hearing, and it eliminates noises. Some kids have had cochlears since, 11 months old, and they perform great with them, and they don't need accommodations like the CPRIT or the interpreter. So they might just need, preferential seating. That varies for every single student.
And then what tips or pointers would you provide to parents? I guess give me one now, and then we'll address it later in the podcast too. So give us one tip that you would provide to a parent of a child who needs DH services or DHH services.
If that child is going to use sign language as their mode of communication, the parent needs to be taking classes and keeping up with those skills. Otherwise, they end up, with a 16-year-old child that they can't have conversations with because they're not up to par on communication.
Very good. And then educators, one tip for educators?
Educators would be, don't say the child hears me. The child may hear you in sound, but they may not be able to have the discrepancy skills to make out your speech sounds. And so words that they miss could either be interpreted differently by them in context, or they may get it, correct in context. But often they need to have that background knowledge and educators need to know exactly what the student is hearing, and that is the case manager's job to explain that to the teachers.
Awesome. Great advice. Okay, so now let's shift to orthopedic programs, which is another program you oversee. Tell us what are orthopedic impairments, and maybe give us one or two examples.
Orthopedic impairments are any type of motor impairment that impacts your education in the classroom. So something like muscular dystrophy, where you have kids that are, all over the range of that. Maybe some of them are, still in wheelchairs. Some of them are trying to walk. Some of them have, problems writing. And so that would affect their management of their classroom accessibility. And then they could have spina bifida and need help with walking and PT services, but maybe their arms are fine and their hands are fine and they're able to write. It varies with each medical condition, and it can vary with services from, related services helping, and also with what the classroom teacher would need to do, or if there's a paraeducator needed.
And you kind of talked about this already. So what services, because you just mentioned paraeducators, what services do students who have orthopedic impairments, what services and supports are available for them, I guess, in the community and in the school, but mostly in the school, because we're talking to our parents and our educators?
Yeah, in the schools, it definitely depends on what that child's needs are. They could be having toileting issues, feeding issues. They may need to have special equipment to help them stand, sit, or reach the desk, or they may need other types of tables that, can be changed out, because sometimes if they're on a computer, they might have a computer attached to a wheelchair, and they might use what's called eye gaze. And so all of those services and accommodations that the students are using have to be provided by a teacher of physical health and disabilities. And they are under the orthopedic impairment, and also traumatic brain injury falls in that category as well.
Okay, very good. Interesting. Are there community organizations that help individuals with orthopedic impairments?
Yeah, there are several places that can help. The difference between someone who has hearing loss and someone who has a motor impairment, the motor impairment is usually specifically due to a disease or a syndrome. And
Mhm.
so when you're that parent of that child and you need resources, you usually go to the doctor for those resources for that specific disease or syndrome. So the community can do things like have, specialized baseball leagues where they have help. They have different adapted golf in the community. They have the community is most involved when it comes to making sure that there are ramps in the right places and that their buildings are meet ADA laws so that they can go back and forth and access those businesses.
Oh, awesome. I didn't know they had sports teams and things like that. Okay. One tip for parents and then one tip for educators relating to orthopedic impairments.
My tip for parents is your child is going to grow and experience school in so many different ways than you may have expected, but they're still going to experience it and they are going to be open to experiences that we would not think they could be open to. And so, always trying different things with your child and pushing them a little further is what's going to help you most. And for educators, don't assume that if you see a child in a wheelchair that it affects them in the classroom. We do have a student varying positions that he would need to be in and to get classroom access and to get accommodations where he can give the feedback that he needs to give are extensive, but he's
Mhm.
making honor roll. So,
So it's physical more so,
yeah,
not cognitive. He's cognitively strong. It's just a physical impairment.
exactly.
Awesome. Great information. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and shift to the next part. Thank you, Dr. Bobby. This is really great information for our families and our educators and our leaders. We want to promote that inclusivity, and knowledge is power. So the more knowledge we can learn about the different impairments, the more ways we can promote that inclusive environments and support all students. So now let's shift to vision impaired programs. And let's talk about that. So, what is a visual impairment? And give me two examples, two or three, whatever you want to offer.
Okay. So there's different types of visual impairments, just like we were talking about with hearing loss.
Mhm.
A lot of the visual impairment depends on the acuity of the eye, which is what you can see. But some of it has to do with what's called cerebral vision impairment, CVI. And
Mhm.
what that means is the brain is not interpreting what the eye is seeing. So we would have to teach them how to associate what they are seeing with and that experience with their brain. And it may take, several years over and over with instruction to be able to learn those things and have the brain process those things. The acuity is usually, they're able to be fixed with glasses, or we have excuse me, we have now some kids that have spots that are missing from their vision. So you may have somebody with peripheral damage, you may have somebody with macular degeneration, which means that they can only see a certain part of what they're looking at. And every kid is not as different if they have the same condition. So, like, as you can put amplification onto a child with hearing loss and you put glasses on a student with vision loss, it's not necessarily the same thing, because you can have a student who needs to use low vision tools like a magnifying dome where they set the dome on top of their words and they're sliding the dome. And there's so many computer software programs now that can help with the vision impaired. They're reading stuff. It's, the immersed reader, they're audible books. And there's
Mhm.
also now quite common in the movies. They have what's called describing what is happening in the movie as well as the conversation that's happening. So they
Like
input
narration,
that.
basically.
Yeah,
Narration. Okay.
narration of what's happening, and they put it with what they're hearing at the same time.
What services and resources Do vision impaired programs offer children with visual impairments? I know you're probably going to mention the IEP, which a lot of them have that. But yeah, what other services that, even myself, I don't know about because I'm learning a lot today.
The services are at different levels. And again, if you're talking about out in the community, you can have a sport called beep ball where, they're playing almost kind of similar to soccer, but they have a ball that beeps. And so they can hear that. You have Easter egg hunts with beeping eggs now. You have, people that use equipment that they can put on their glasses and also have a microphone at the end of their glasses, and you can call up a service and that service will tell you where you're walking, what's in the way. And there's also apps that can do things for you where you take the picture and the app will describe what's in the picture. So a lot of that is, in the community and helping them work through their exceptionality in the community, but it's the educators, the specialized instruction for vision impaired students that really helps them to start defining and navigating what equipment they would need to be successful.
I'm smiling at the Easter egg beeping. I love the glasses and the narration.
Yep.
It's so many different things. Oh my goodness. So you mentioned the services and resources. You already kind of touched on this one with school programs. Anything else you want to add about school programs and how school programs address the varying needs? You mentioned specialized instruction, but is there anything else you want to add to that before we shift to something else?
Of course. There are Braille readers who we teach from, beginning Braille all the way up to using specialized Braille for math and science. We also have graphics that are made especially for the students. So if you have a map of the world and in your book as a sighted person, and we want to provide that same picture, we have different tactile graphics that we can make so that they can be able to feel the picture and get a sense of what they're talking about. And we also have orientation and mobility services, which they are specialists that come in and teach the kids how to orient to their environment and then move through their environment safely.
What other things that staff do, since you brought up the fact that staff, the mobility specialists? So what are some other school personnel that help a student with the vision impairment?
A lot of it is understanding the diagnosis and understanding what the child can see. So the teachers of vision impaired, we have like a set of goggles that we can simulate what the child is experiencing with their vision. So the teacher of the visually impaired can bring that out either to a class or to teachers that are working with that student so they get an idea of exactly what they're seeing. We also use para-educators to work with students, helping them get their books out, helping them stay organized, working through if there's something in the room that the teacher is drawing on the board, then a para-educator could, talk next to the person and tell them what they're seeing. There's also who we call Braille clerks, and they produce all the Braille and tactile graphics for the students. And then, of course, the general ed and special education teachers who are learning about how to work with our students, and then they can be helpful, during the time that they're in their classroom.
Wow, so many resources, and it's just wonderful to hear about it. You mentioned a little bit about the community organizations, and you mentioned some things that can happen in the community as far as going to the movies and doing other outings. Are there any other things you want to touch on or provide any information about any community organizations to promote inclusivity for individuals with vision impairments?
Yes, the Lions Club is one of the biggest ones for vision impairment. They will help with screenings for hearing and vision. They will provide coupons for them to go to a doctor to get glasses and help them, pay for those. There are mobile vans that will go through different communities and schools, and they will do not only will they do the hearing and vision process, but they actually will make the glasses on site for the student. There's the Center for Visually Impaired that is close to downtown, and they provide services. And there's also the Tools for Life Association that's now called the Inclusivity Center, and they will do a lot to help with the equipment that they might need as they're growing up that, a school doesn't provide. They may have equipment there that they can either loan the student or teach the student to use, so that as they get older, they're still included in the community and there's still devices that are available to them at no expense.
Interesting. And some of these organizations, like the Lion Club, you mentioned downtown. We're in Metro Atlanta. Are there are they nationwide or statewide? So give us a little. For my listeners, because I have listeners everywhere, where would they go to? The local organization, state organization, or some of these things they can just look up online that are national. If that makes sense, what I'm asking you.
Yes, it does. And we can say that Lions Club is national and international, but it definitely depends on if there are groups active in your community. So there may be, one club that's active for the whole east side of the state, but then they may not have anybody for the west side of the state. Or they also have early intervention programs through different communities like 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 in Georgia. They will help with birth to 3-year-olds who have vision impairment and provide a curriculum for the child and the parents. And there's also Lighthouse, which also offers some pediatric information. But mostly I would tell parents to call their schools for the blind that's in their state, and they usually can give you a lot more information. And then you can also call the Department of Education in each state, and they will help with what's available out there.
Perfect. That's segue into your tip for parents. What tip do you have for educators? It was perfect. You're like reading my mind here. Um, so tips for educators. One tip for now, and then we're going to get to everything at the end of the show as we wrap up.
Okay, so a tip for educators working with students who are vision impaired, my best tip would be to make sure that the student is included. Make sure you do everything that you can to provide for that student to have access to the same materials that your kids in your class have. Because if we have a Braille reader and you didn't give the test to the Braille clerk in time, and so the student is sitting there during test time and they don't have a test just like anybody else, that's not fair to the child.
It's excluding them, and we want inclusion, not exclusion.
Exactly.
Correct.
And then for parents, I would say learn about your child's condition, learn what services are available in the community. If you have a school district that your child is the only child with vision impairment at his or her high school, find out what they can belong to, either online. They have communities online where they talk back and forth. They have different things in different cities. We used to have, I can't remember if it had a name, but it was an experience to become blind. And you would go through this experience tunnel and you'd have to, pick out a can of corn among all the cans of beans. And if you have a visual impairment, that can be very difficult. So learning the ways that your child could identify those items would be, put 2 rubber bands on the can of corn and don't label the beans. And that way they can figure out each thing. But as much access as you can give them to workarounds for their vision is the better for them growing up.
Great tips. Great tips. Thank you so much. Now we're going to shift to the next part, which is something I know that is near and dear to your heart. It is a local orthopedic contest. You want to tell us about that? Give us a little overview about that, when it happens, and then for those in the area, how they can get involved and attend or find out about one in their area.
The local oratorical contest comes through the local agency that's called the Optimist Club. Every state has an Optimist Club. Again, it's kind of like the Lions Club, if they're very active or not active. But where we are, we've been very fortunate to have a very active group. We've been doing the oratorical contest for the deaf, hard of hearing students for 20 years. And it's actually a speech that they write that's 4 to 5 minutes long and tells whatever the topic is, it always has to do with optimism and tell how they are optimistic in their life and what their experience has been to become successful and to become a successful citizen. And those kids go on to another level that win. And when they win at the state level, they get a $2,500 scholarship. They
Wow.
also
Okay.
have, yeah, they also have a written essay contest that they do something similar with. And then the International Optimist Club, of course, provides international programming and contests for them. We do it here. We have all of our kids participate in one way or another, whether they want to come and watch, whether they want to actually give a speech, whether they want to say a little joke, in between while we're switching students, whether they do a dance or an exercise routine. We have a lot of clubs that will come in from the different schools and they will sign a song or sign the pledge or, just be involved with the whole contest all around. And the Optimist Club, helps provide lunch for those kids. And we usually have about 20 speakers, and then we have probably about 2 to 4 schools that will bring other kids that may be in an ASL club or an ASL class, and they will perform as well. And it happens usually in the spring.
I love it. I went for the first time last year. I almost cried, the ugly cry. I had to hold it back because it was so inspirational and so sweet, and it was so heartwarming. It really is a treat. So if that's something that you guys could start in your community, to my listeners out there, I would encourage you. And if you can attend one, you will not be disappointed. And Dr. Bobby, you do a really good job with hosting it and putting it together and working with the Optimist Club. It is just really a wonderful, wonderful program and opportunity for students. I love it.
Thank you. It does. It is near and dear to my heart, and it does give the kids a chance to process their story, and just to see them grow from that is amazing in itself.
All right, segue to the next part. You gave a lot of tips for parents, but just with everything, to summarize everything: vision impaired, hearing impaired, orthopedic impaired, one tip for parents as we get ready to close out.
My one tip for parents overall would be to not let others limit your child in their education or in their mobility or in how they deal with vision loss or hearing loss. Don't let anybody limit your child.
Perfect. I love it. And now let's shift to our educators. What is a great tip we can leave with our educators as we summarize all 3 programs and bring it all together?
My tip for educators overall would be to speak with the parents and the child about what the child needs. We have our children do what's called advocacy project, and it's a project where they can tell about their special needs, what their condition is, what they can hear, see, or how they can move about best. And they are the ones that know what works for them. So always try to listen to the child and the parent when it comes to any type of exceptionality.
Awesome. And when I say educators, usually I break this podcast down and I talk to parents, leaders, and educators. But I feel like that tip will be one that can align with school leaders as well when you're trying to promote inclusion in your building. So that last tip is for educators and my leaders out there. Well, thank you, Dr. Bobby, for spending time and just giving us some great information and knowledge and just inspiring us to continue to be inclusive, educating us on the different programs that you oversee, and just providing some great tips to the listeners, our listeners, about the vision impairment programs, deaf and hard of hearing programs, and the orthopedic impaired programs. And then, of course, the wonderful contest. If this is something that you can gain access to in your community, I encourage you once again to go. You will not be disappointed. And if it's something that you want to start in your community, remind me again, Dr. Bobby, you said, what was it? What club was it? Optimist Club?
Optimist Club and Lions Club.
Lions Club, that was the other one. I remember the Optimist Club. So communicate with your Optimist Club and your Lions Club and see if this is something that you may want to get started in your community to empower our students, allow them to share their stories, and then promote inclusion. Thank you, Dr. Bobby, for being with us today. I appreciate you. And of course, I love you. You want to close out or say anything for our listeners, or are you good to go?
I think it's great that you're providing this for your listeners because our exceptionalities are so low that they're called low incidence. And so sometimes people can miss, what their exceptionality is. And so I love you for providing this to parents and educators.
Thank you. Now let's shift to the next part of the podcast. I want to encourage you to follow and subscribe to the EduFaith Consulting website. Subscribe to my page. It's www.edufaithconsulting.com so you can stay abreast and subscribe to my monthly newsletter, my blog, and all the information that I have on my website to help support parents, educators, and leaders, promote inclusivity, and support our students. Also, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the EduFaith Essentials YouTube page so you can stay abreast of all the happenings. And as always, I appreciate your support with following me and my company in the podcast. On the next episode, I'm going to give you a breakdown and an overview of the 2024 Council for Exceptional Children's Conference. You know, I have been talking about it for the last couple of episodes. I didn't really mention it in this episode because the next episode that I record, I'm going to give you an overview of the topics that I went over and just give you a recap. Just a little preview. It was wonderful. I had a great experience. I made a lot of connections and it was pretty successful. You will hear more on the next episode of the EduFaith Essentials podcast. But if you are watching the video, that is a picture of me in my EduFaith Educational Services t-shirt. Check me out. My book excerpt for today, since we talked about a lot of information for deaf and hard of hearing and vision impaired or orthopedic impairments, I am not going to read an excerpt, but I do want to remind you that my books are available on Amazon. Please grab a copy. I know in my essential tips for coordinators, my essential tips for leaders, educators, and parents, I do provide an overview of those programs in the book. So I want to encourage you to get essential, grab a copy of the books because I do provide an overview of those programs in each of my books so you can better understand it and it aligns with the podcast. So go to Amazon and buy those, get your copy, and get essential. Our word of wisdom for today: kindness is the language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see. And that quote is coming from Mark Twain. Thank you for all that you do. And let's shift to the next part of the podcast.
You've got mail.
Now it's time for our essential advice, Ask Dr. Nikia, or share an inspirational story. I want to use this platform to support and spotlight fellow educators, families, and community members. If you have a question, want advice, or to share a wonderful inspirational story on this podcast, feel free to email me at edufaithforall@gmail.com. That is EDUFAITH4ALL@gmail.com. May read your letter, provide advice, or share your story on this podcast. Disclaimer, all listeners should adhere to district policies, follow protocols, remain ethical, and adhere to guidelines in the best interest of children. EduFaith Essentials does not assume responsibility or is legally responsible for anyone's actions based on information provided on this podcast. I want to encourage you to get essential. Go to www.edufaithconsulting.com to see what EduFaith Educational Services has to offer. I have valuable resources, information, and a blog that you can subscribe to and find out more essential tips and resources. Go to www.edufaithconsulting.com and subscribe to the EduFaith Educational Services page. Get essential. This podcast is brought to you by EduFaith Educational Services. Some services offered through EduFaith Consulting include consulting and advocacy for parents, consulting for educators, leaders, and school districts, college accommodation advocacy, consulting and training, advocacy and supporting individuals with college accommodations at the post-secondary level, as well as university trainings to support individuals with disabilities and services, parent education trainings, college and career coaching for students who are entering the workforce or the post-secondary college setting, business and district professional development and trainings for churches, nonprofits, businesses, districts, and communities, specializing in services for diverse learners, including students with disabilities, interventions under the multi-tier system of support, English speakers of other languages, education and leadership coaching, program development under services under IDEA, Section 504, trainings, diverse learners, and essential tips books. Feel free to go to www.edufaithconsulting.com to view all the services that EduFaith Educational Services. I want to encourage my believers to be blessed. All others, be kind, be well, and be the change. Follow EduFaith on social media. Twitter, EduFaithS. On Instagram, EduFaith 2021. On LinkedIn, EduFaith Educational Services. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting EduFaith Educational Services and the EduFaith Essentials podcast. Subscribe and follow EduFaith Essentials on the EduFaith Essentials YouTube page and listen to the EduFaith Essentials podcast on all streaming platforms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Have a wonderful day and get essential.